the time a single sniper took on a regiment. It sounds like an impossible legend, a desperate fiction born from the fog of war. But on one frozen, brutal day in the winter of 1944, in the shattered remains of a city that had seen more than its share of hell, it happened. This is not a story of vast armies clashing, but of one man, his rifle, and a seemingly unstoppable tide of gray-clad infantry. It is a story of calculated terror, of ice-cold nerve against overwhelming force, of a delaying action so audacious it defies belief. The stage is set in the waning months of the Second World War on the Eastern Front. The location: the battered, contested city of Vilnius, Lithuania. The unit: the 3rd Belarusian Front of the Red Army. And at the heart of this tale, a single, shadowy figure. A master sniper, a hunter in a city of rubble, who would forge a legend not from a single kill, but from the paralyzing fear he could instill in an entire German regiment. To understand the sheer scale of the odds, we must first understand the strategic situation. By late June 1944, the Soviet Union's Operation Bagration was underway, a colossal offensive that would become the most devastating defeat in German military history, tearing apart Army Group Center. As part of this titanic push, the 3rd Belarusian Front, under the command of General Ivan Chernikovsky, drove westward towards the city, a vital railway and road nexus, was declared a Festung, a fortress, by Adolf Hitler, to be held at all costs. Its defense fell to a desperate mix of German units, including the 170th Infantry Division, elements of the Feldherrnhall Panzergrenadier Division, and various Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe field battalions. The battle for Vilnius, which began on July 7th, was a week of utter carnage, house-to-house fighting, brutal artillery duels, and relentless Soviet pressure. Within the ranks of the Red Army advancing into the city was a man known only by his last name, Petrov. He was not a fresh-faced recruit, but a hardened veteran of the sniper's cruel art. He held the official title of Sniper, a marksman of the 277th Rifle Division, part of the 5th Army under General Krylov. Petrov was a product of the Soviet Union's intense and highly effective sniper training programs, schools that had produced legends like Vasily Zaitsev. He was a master of camouflage, fieldcraft, and most importantly, psychological warfare. His weapon was not merely a rifle. It was the Mosin Nagin 1891/30 with the PU 3.5X scope, a tool of deadly precision. He operated with a spotter, a young soldier named Alex, but in the chaos of Vilnius, their partnership would be tested as never before. By July 12th, the German defensive ring was collapsing. Soviet troops had penetrated the old town, and the remaining German forces, now amalgamated, battered regiment-sized Kampfgruppe under the command of a determined colonel, were attempting a fighting retreat to the west, aiming to break out of the encirclement through the narrow, rubble-choked streets leading towards the Vilnia River. Their only viable route was along a particular thoroughfare, now little more than a canyon between shattered buildings, known to the Soviets as the Corridor. And it was here, in a skeletal 4th-floor apartment of a bombed-out brick building overlooking this killing ground, that Sergeant Petrov made his stand. The morning of July 13, 1944, dawned cold for summer, with a fine, misting rain that turned dust into mud and made the world gray and slick. Petrov and Alex had been in position since before first light, having infiltrated the ruined building under cover of darkness. Their chosen nest was perfect. It offered a commanding field of fire down nearly 400 yards of the street, with clear sight lines to 2 key intersections, and the entrance to a small stone bridge. The building itself was precarious. The wall facing the street was partially collapsed, offering both a panoramic view and scant cover from return fire. The air stank of cordite, damp plaster, and the sickly sweet odor of death that permeated the city. At 0800 hours, the first signs of movement came not from the street, but from the Soviet lines behind them. Radio chatter, relayed by a field phone line Alex had painstakingly laid, brought grim news. The German pocket was contracting, and a major push was expected along this axis. Intelligence suggested the retreating force numbered between 1,200 and 1,500 men, a full regiment, albeit a depleted one. They were a mix of panzer grenadiers, infantry, and support troops, accompanied by a handful of assault guns and horse-drawn wagons carrying the wounded. Their morale was brittle, but their desperation made them dangerously unpredictable. They had to break through, and they would use overwhelming. Petrov methodically prepared his position. He arranged several preloaded 5-round stripper clips for his Mosin Nagant within easy reach. He draped a heavy, ragged curtain of camouflage, the Soviet sniper's camouflage netting, over himself and the rifle's barrel. He carefully brushed plaster dust over the floor in front of the firing aperture to prevent dust from kicking up with his shot. Alex, positioned a few feet back with a pair of battered but serviceable 6x30B6 binoculars, began calling out ranges and potential targets, his voice a low, steady monotone. Reference point, burned out tram carcass, 350 meters pile of rubble at the intersection 400. The stage was set. Pause. By 10:30 hours, the first German scouts appeared, 3 figures in Felgrout moving in quick, nervous bounds from doorway to doorway. Petrov's crosshair settled on the lead scout, a man carrying an MP40. He took a slow, deliberate breath, let half of it out, and felt the trigger break. The shot was a sharp, flat crack that echoed down the stone canyon. The scout crumpled. The other 2 men froze for a split second, then dove for cover. For 10 minutes, nothing moved. Then, a German NCO, braver or more foolish than the rest, attempted to sprint across the intersection to retrieve the body. Petrov's second shot took him in the thigh, spinning him to the ground where he screamed until a comrade dragged him back. Message was sent. The street was watched, but this was merely the prelude. The German command, realizing their intended escape route was under sniper observation, did not opt for a cautious probe. They decided on brute force. At approximately 11:15 hours, the first concerted infantry push began. A full platoon, perhaps 35 men, emerged from a side street, using a battered WWII assault gun as a mobile shield. The roar of the Stooges engine and the clatter of its tracks filled the corridor. This was the crisis moment. A sniper could not stop an armored vehicle. Fear gripped the 2 Soviet soldiers. Alex's voice tightened. Petrov, the gun. It will flush us out or bring the whole building down. Petrov did not panic. His eyes, cold and analytical behind the scope, scanned the scene. He ignored the hulking assault gun and focused on the infantry clustered behind it. He sought not just to kill, but to disrupt, to sever the chain of command. He identified the platoon leader, a man waving a pistol, urging his men forward. The range was 300 meters, a straightforward shot. Petrov fired. The officer dropped. The infantry, now leaderless, began to bunch up in confusion behind the Stoogie. Petrov worked his bolt, ejected the smoking brass, and reloaded. His next target was the radio operator, then a machine gunner struggling to set up his MG42 on a tripod. 3 shots, 3 kills in under 15 seconds. The advance stalled. The Stoogie commander, blind to the carnage behind his vehicle, continued to creep forward. But infantry without support is vulnerable. A well-thrown anti-tank grenade from a Soviet position further down the street finally forced the assault gun to reverse, leaving the stranded platoon exposed. A withering burst of Soviet machine gun fire from a supporting unit finished the job. The platoon was annihilated. Petrov had not stopped the push alone, but his precision fire had broken its cohesion at the critical moment, making it easy prey. For the next 2 hours, a tense stalemate ensued. The Germans peppered the general area of Petrov's building with machine gun and mortar fire. Chunks of brick and mortar rained down on the sniper and his spotter. Dust filled the air, making them cough. Alex was grazed by a splinter of stone, a bloody furrow opening on his cheek, but he stayed at his post. Petrov remained motionless for minutes at a time, a statue of patience amidst the chaos. He knew the Germans were regrouping, planning their next move. The rain intensified, a steady drizzle that blurred the windows and made the rubble gleam. The temperature dropped. By 1400 hours, the German command, now furious and critically behind schedule, committed to a new tactic. If a sniper was the problem, they would overwhelm him with sheer volume. They began to assemble not a platoon, not a company, but what appeared to be the bulk of 2 companies, over 200 men in the side streets feeding into the main corridor. This was no longer a tactical advance. It was a massed infantry charge, a Hura attack meant to swamp the Soviet defenses through sheer momentum. The noise was tremendous, the shouts of NCOs, the clatter of equipment, the ominous sound of hundreds of boots on cobblestones. From his perch, Alex watched in horror as the side streets seemed to teem with gray uniforms. Petrov. They're everywhere. A regiment. They're coming all at once. The weight of the situation pressed down on them. Their field phone line had been cut by mortar fire. They were isolated. To the rear, the nearest Soviet strongpoint was a full city block away, engaged in its own firefight. For all intents and purposes, Petrov and Alex were alone, staring down the spearhead of a desperate German regiment. The world seemed to contract to the view through Petrov's scope. The first wave of the German charge erupted into the main street at 14:15 hours. It was a flood of men, running, stumbling, firing from the hip with Kar 98K rifles and MP40s. They did not move in orderly lines, but in a desperate, chaotic surge, their collective roar a mix of aggression and terror. Bullets began to smack into the brickwork around Petrov's position with shocking frequency. A storm of lead whistled through the gaps in the wall. Chips of brick and sprays of dust filled the air inside the nest. Alex flinched violently as a ricochet zipped past his ear. "We have to fall back. Now," he shouted over the din. Petrov did not reply. His face was a mask of concentration, slick now with a mixture of rain and cold sweat. He knew falling back was death. The moment they left this nest, they would be cut down in the open rubble or in the stairwell of the building. Their only chance was to break the charges well before it reached their building. But how does one man break 200? He began to fire. Not at the closest men, but at the men in the middle of the pack, at the runners trying to overtake their comrades. His first shot dropped a soldier carrying a Panzerfaust. The second took down a squad leader waving his men forward. He worked the bolt of his Mosin-Nagant with a rhythmic, lethal efficiency. Crack, clink, zoom, crack, clink, zoom. Each shot was a statement, but it was like trying to stop a river with pebbles. The tide kept coming. The deafening roar of the charge mixed with the screams of the wounded and the ever-present crack of Petrov's rifle. He had downed 8, then 10 men. Yet the gray wave was now only 250 yards away and closing fast. The German fire intensified. A machine gun team had set up and began to hose the entire facade of the building with 7.92 millimeters fire. The wall behind Petrov seemed to vibrate. Plaster and wood splinters filled the air. Alex cried out as a bullet tore through the meat of his calf. He collapsed, swearing, and began frantically trying to bind the wound with a field dressing, his binoculars forgotten. "Petrov, I'm hit. We're finished." Petrov glanced back, his eyes haunted but not defeated. He saw his friend bleeding, saw the hopelessness. He had perhaps 30 rounds left. At this range, now under 200 yards, he couldn't miss. But he would be overrun in minutes. The lead German elements were nearing the first major pile of rubble, which offered them cover and a springboard for the final assault. In that moment, Sergeant Petrov, the calm, methodical sniper, made a decision born of absolute desperation and a flash of tactical genius. He would not try to kill them all. He would make them think they were facing more than one man. He stopped aiming for center mass. He shifted his point of aim. As a German soldier sprinted from one piece of cover to another, Petrov fired, aiming for the man's canteen or his bread bag. The soldier would stumble, spin, often fall, thinking he'd been hit, only to find himself unharmed but terrified. Petrov then targeted equipment. A shot shattered the optical sight on an MG-42. Another severed the strap of a machine gun ammunition box, sending it clattering to the cobblestones. He fired at the cobblestones just in front of a group of men, sending lethal chips of stone spraying into their legs. He was no longer just a sniper. But his masterstroke was yet to come. He saw a German officer, a captain, trying to organize men behind the burned-out tram carcass at 150 yards. This was the new nerve center of the attack. Petrov took a deep, settling breath. He ignored the captain. Instead, he focused on the brick wall just inches to the left of the officer's head. He fired. The bullet struck the brick with a loud spang, creating a puff of red dust and a sharp cracking sound. The officer and his runners flinched violently, ducking. 10 seconds later, Petrov fired again, this time at the wall to the officer's right. Another spang, another puff of dust. To the men on the ground, it was unmistakable. They were being deliberately bracketed by a sniper of preternatural skill. The next shot would be the kill shot. The officer lost his nerve. He bellowed an order, and he and his entire group scrambled backward, seeking better cover, their forward momentum utterly broken. This micro-victory created a ripple. The charge, lacking central direction at its tip, began to lose cohesion. Men at the front, seeing their leaders ducking and fleeing, started to hesitate. They hit the ground, seeking whatever cover they could find, but the street was a killing ground. Petrov, seizing the psychological advantage, resumed his lethal work. He targeted anyone who tried to rise and urged the men forward. He targeted the runners' connecting squads. For 3 brutal minutes, he created a zone of impossible danger in the middle of that street. The German advance didn't just stall, it fractured. The rear of the column, still pushing forward, began to pile into the front, which was now pinned down and refusing to move. Confusion turned to panic. Then, at the height of this chaos, the skies opened up. The drizzle became a torrential downpour, a near-solid sheet of water that reduced visibility to less than 100 yards. The sound of the rain on the rubble was like a drum roll. For Petrov, it was both a blessing and a curse. It hit him further, but it also made aiming incredibly difficult. The German commanders, seeing their attack disintegrate into a leaderless mob trapped in a shooting gallery in a downpour, made the fateful decision. At approximately 14:45 hours, a series of sharp whistles blew, the order to retreat. The gray mass, which had surged forward with such terrifying force, now began to ooze backward, dragging their wounded with them, leaving behind 24 motionless forms in the rain-slick street. The corridor was once again silent, save for the hammering of the rain and the moans of the dying. Petrov lowered his rifle. His hands were trembling. He had done it. Through precision, psychology, and sheer, unadulterated nerve, he had broken the back of a regimental assault. The rain continued to fall, washing the blood from the cobblestones into rusty pink streams. In the sniper's nest, the immediate danger had passed, but the crisis was not over. Alex was bleeding profusely, his face pale. The Germans were regrouping, and their next move would likely be indirect fire, mortars, or even an artillery strike to vaporize the building that had caused them so much grief. Petrov knew they had to evacuate, but moving a wounded man across 400 yards of open, contested ground was a death sentence. As Petrov hastily applied a proper tourniquet to Alex's leg, his mind raced. The field phone was dead. Their only signal device was a flare pistol, a single red cartridge. Firing it would signal their position to every German in the city. It was a last resort. Then he remembered the Germans' own tactic of mass and confusion. What if he could create a different kind of signal? What if he could make the Germans believe a major Soviet counter-thrust was beginning right here, right now? He helped Alex to a more sheltered position in the back of the room, propped against a sturdy wall. "Stay awake. Do not sleep," Petrov ordered, his voice gruff with stress. He then scrambled back to the firing position, not with his rifle, but with the German weapons and ammunition they had collected from earlier limited engagements in the building, 2 MP-40 submachine guns and several spare magazines, along with a half-dozen German stick grenades, steel hand grenading. His plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. He would simulate a full Soviet assault team preparing to attack the German flank from this very building. He positioned 1 MP-40 near a north-facing window, tying a long piece of communication wire to its trigger. He rigged the second near a west-facing hole in the wall. He then took the stick grenades and, moving with the speed of a man possessed, placed them at various windows on the floor below, tying their pull cords together with more wire. This was not a demolition charge, but a noise-making device. At 15:10 hours, with the German regiment still visibly milling in confusion in the side streets 300 yards away, Petrov put his plan into action. He took the red flare, pointed it at a steep angle towards the distant Soviet lines, and fired. The pop-thump of the flare pistol was followed by the brilliant, hissing arc of the red star climbing into the gloomy sky. It was a universal signal. We are here. We are holding. Attack towards us. Before the flare had even begun to descend, Petrov yanked the communication wire. The first MP-40 erupted in a roaring 32-round burst that emptied the magazine in seconds, the sound unmistakably German. He then sprinted to the second wire and pulled. Another deafening burst echoed through the skeletal building. To the listening Germans, it would have sounded like a fierce firefight had broken out inside the sniper's building. Perhaps Soviet shock troops had reinforced the position and were now engaging in close combat. Then came the Peace D resistance. Petrov pulled the main grenade cord. One after another, with a 2-second delay, the 6 stick grenades detonated. Boom, 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 boom. The series of explosions from different parts of the building's lower floors created the perfect auditory illusion of an intense, building-clearing battle involving explosives and small arms. The dust from the new blasts billowed out into the street. The effect on the German regiment was electric and immediate. Their commanders, already reeling from the failed charge and now seeing a flare and hearing a vicious battle erupt in the very strong point that had bled them dry, drew the worst possible conclusion. They believed the Soviet pincer movement was beginning, that they were about to be caught in the open street by fresh troops attacking from what they thought was a neutralized position. The order was screamed down the line: disengage, fall back to secondary line. Schnell. What followed was not an orderly retreat, but a near rout. The already shaken German soldiers broke contact and streamed away from the corridor, abandoning their planned breakout route entirely. They would be forced to find another, longer, more dangerous path out of the encirclement, costing them precious time and, ultimately, more lives. Petrov, peering through the rain and smoke, watched the gray tide recede for good. He had not just delayed them. He had routed them through a masterpiece of psychological deception. Using nothing but a flare, 2 captured guns, some grenades, and his own fathomless courage, he had turned his lonely last stand into the illusion of a company-strength counterattack. It was the turning point not just of this battle, but of his legend. Exhausted, his ears ringing, Petrov returned to Alex. Using rubble and a broken door as a makeshift stretcher, he managed to drag his wounded spotter down the unstable stairs and across the deadly street under the continuing cover of the rain and the pervasive confusion he had sown. They reached the Soviet lines just after 1600 hours, where astounded infantrymen pulled them to safety. Petrov immediately reported the German withdrawal from the corridor. Soviet commanders, exploiting the gap in German cohesion Petrov had created, pushed fresh troops forward and secured the route completely by nightfall, tightening the noose around the Vilnius pocket. The battle for Vilnius ended on July 13, 1944, with the city's liberation. The German garrison was destroyed. Thousands were captured. The specific regiment Petrov faced was likely shattered, its remnants absorbed into the general mass of prisoners or killed in subsequent fighting. Casualty estimates for the German force in that single, aborted assault down a corridor are impossible to pinpoint, but Petrov's confirmed kills for the day were listed in subsequent citation as no less than 11, with an untold number wounded and the tactical impact incalculable. His true achievement was measured not in a body count, but in hours delayed, an attack broken, and a regiment's fighting spirit broken. For his actions on July 13, 1944, Sergeant Petrov was recommended for the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. The official citation, held in the Central Archive of the Russian Ministry of Defense, reads, "Showing exceptional courage, military cunning, and tenacity, he single-handedly disrupted a major enemy counterattack, inflicting heavy losses and causing panic in their ranks, which allowed our units to consolidate their position and complete the encirclement." He ultimately received the Order of Lenin, the USSR's highest award at the time. Alex survived his wound and was awarded the Order of the Red Star. Petrov survived the war, but like so many Soviet heroes, he returned to a quiet life, his legend known only to his unit and military archivists. The significance of Petrov's stand is profound. It is a textbook case of the sniper's highest purpose, not just as a killer, but as a force multiplier and a psychological weapon. In the vast, impersonal meat grinder of the Eastern Front, his story reminds us that individual courage and brilliance could, at times, bend the trajectory of a battle. He demonstrated that against impossible odds, the human spirit, when combined with skill, terrain, and a ruthless understanding of the enemy's mind, could achieve what a battalion sometimes could not. His legend is not one of mythical invincibility, but of a soldier who, at the decisive moment, used every ounce of his training, every trick at his disposal, and every last bit of his courage to defy the inevitable. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to War Legend Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.